Anybody comes to the link, they can watch. Cool. Thanks for coming, everyone. This is a practice talk for StarSem 2016, and it's presenting a paper, High-Fidelity Lexical Axiom Construction from Verb Glosses. And it's work that I've been doing with Len this past year. So language. So in a basic sense, language is constructed in terms of words and syntax. So we can get the syntax from the parse tree, and then words are described by their definitions. So we would like to get the meanings of words. We would like to obtain the meanings of words in a machine understandable way. And this is actually a subset of a problem that's already well known in AI, which is the knowledge acquisition bottleneck. And a very important subset of that is lexical knowledge, since all language is made up of words. So a dictionary is human comprehensible lexical knowledge base. So we think why not start there and try to create a machine comprehensible version. So the basic outline of this presentation is we'll first discuss some previous work and some limitations that we found. And then the high-fidelity lexical axiom construction from Verb Glosses that describes the system itself that we developed. And then the evaluation, which includes ELS match, which is a metric that we developed. And then the conclusions and future work. So in terms of previous work, creating machine comprehensible dictionary has been done before. Notably, Jerry Hobbs and James Allen and his colleagues have done a fair amount of work in this. But we found some important shortcomings in this work in the semantic representation. So the semantic representation is very important because natural language is very expressive. Here is a list of a lot of the devices that are in natural language. There are predicates, connectives, quantifiers, equality, that's all in first order logic. There is generalized quantifiers such as most men who spoke, intentional predicates, believe, intend, and resemble, predicate and sentence modification, such as very gracefully, nearly, and possibly, predicate and sentence reification. So beauty is subjective, is reifying a predicate beauty, and then that exoplanet exists is now certain, is reifying the sentence exoplanet exists. And then there is a reference to events and situations, such as many children have not been vaccinated against measles. This situation caused sporadic outbreaks of the disease. And really, for any representation, for any system that is trying to translate a dictionary into a machine comprehensible form, should be able to represent all of these devices, since the words are described using these devices and are also used in context of these devices. And also the semantic representation needs to have a formal interpretation to justify the inference. So we'll quickly go over just some of the limitations of Jerry Hobbs and the representations used by Jerry Hobbs and James Allen. So Jerry Hobbs uses Hobbesian logical form, which has issues in the interpretation of quantifiers, and it conflates events and propositions. We go in more detail of this in the paper, but we'll go quickly to keep it brief. And then James Allen and his colleagues use description logic, specifically LDL, and this is not quite satisfactory in how it handles predicate and sentence verification, predicate modification, self-reference, and uncertainty. So we are using episodic logic, which is an extended first-order logic, and it is able to handle most natural language devices. And it's backed by a very fast and comprehensive theorem prover, Epilogue. And here's an example of a EL representation of a sentence. So there is a sentence: Kim believes that every galaxy harbors life. So here we have an intentional predicate, and then there's also reification of the sentence: every galaxy harbors life. And then there's also the reification of kind, and reification of the predicate life, which these aren't all of the devices, but it's a quick example. And then we'll go over some of the details of episodic logic so that you can understand the formulas that we show later on. So first, the words are represented in terms of the word itself, of how it's represented in English, followed by the word sense, and then it's suffixed by the part of speech. And then episodic logic has infixed formulas for readability, and these are represented in square brackets, so you can identify when we are using infixed formulas this way. So this is used for predicate applications, so John loved Mary, so love is the operator there. And then same with connectives, such as coordinators and implication. And then episodic operators, which we'll describe more carefully. And then prefix formulas are in parentheses. So there's curried predicate application, which is a variant of the predicate application here. And when it's curried, then we used prefix forms. So here it's the same, but it applies to the object first and then to the subject. And then there's also negation and then modification. So loudly whisper, or in the past, or like Alice message to Bob. And then quantification is also uses prefix formulas. And then reification, so the kind operator and the that operator. And we also use restricted quantifiers, which for all, it translates to implication of the two formulas. And then for existential, it is the it's the and of the two formulas. And then a couple special operators for episodic logic is, so there are the episodic operators. So if you have phi double star e, that translates to the formula phi characterizes episode e, so it describes it in a really full fashion. And then phi single star e just means that formula phi is true in the episode e, but doesn't really characterize it. And then there's reification of predicates, which uses the kind operator, k. So an example is k, the kind of the predicate man would be mankind. And then the that operator reifies sentences. So the sentence that John is a man reifies John is a man. So now that we've covered the basics, we'll go over the system itself. Here's an overview of the system. So we start with a WordNet entry, which has the examples, the frames, and then also a tag gloss. And then the part of speech tag gloss. And then the first step, we refine the frames by looking at the examples in the gloss. And then in the second step, we parse the gloss into episodic logic. And then finally, we construct an axiom that implicates from if an episode, if the word entry is characterizing an episode, then the semantic parse of the gloss, along with the arguments that we identify from the frames, is implied. So first, we'll go over argument structure inference. So for argument structure inference, we start with the frames provided by WordNet, which are fairly basic. So here are a few examples for the entry for quarrel, there are the frames somebody quarrel, and then somebody followed by a prepositional phrase. And then for paint, there's somebody paint something. So we see that there is something and somebody, which gives a very rough description of the types of the arguments. And there's also nail, so there's here's a ditransitive frame, and so on. And then we refine and extend the frames using both the examples and the gloss. So here is an example in each case. So for the entry of quarrel, there are the two examples. We quarreled over the question as to who discovered America, and these two fellows are always scrapping over something, where scrapping is a synonym of quarrel for the synset, so it's acting as the same word. And we can identify from these two examples that the subject can actually be a plural number of people rather than just a single person. And then also that we can have a preposition over afterwards. And then also we're able to refine the arguments from the gloss. So for the gloss of paint, of the second sense is make a painting. And from that we can identify that the second argument, rather than just being something, which is the frame that is provided, that actually the thing is actually painting. So we can narrow down the frame. And then finally, we're able to remove and merge redundant frames for clarity, and as well as if it's logically redundant, then it'll make it so that we can be more effective in the future. So if we have somebody followed by a verb and something followed by a verb, then something logically encapsulates somebody. So we're able to merge those two. And then in cases where it's followed by an adjective or a noun, and then there's also a frame where it follows by a prepositional phrase, we merge those two to show all the different things that can be followed by. And then we also add dative alternations for ditransitive verbs. And then the second step, this is really the bulk of the system, where we're semantically parsing the gloss. And this takes three primary steps. So first, we do a couple of pre-processing steps, which help in improving the accuracy of the semantic parsing. And then we use an EL parser that's modeled after the parser used in the KNX system. And then finally, we do some word synthesis ambiguation. So for pre-processing, we have pre-processing of the arguments, which includes replacing existing arguments with canonical arguments, and also inserting canonical arguments where they are missing. And this pre-processing step is very important for making the future steps reliable by canonicalizing all the arguments, and also it allows for future steps to be simplified, as we'll see. So an example here is that slam, the gloss word is strike violently, but clearly the object and the subject and the object are missing. And then for paint, it's make a painting, where the subject is missing, and then the object is specified here. So in both cases, we replace the subject with I'll, and then the object with it. And then if we have indirect objects, we replace it with them. And we'll see that once we parse this in episodic logic, I or myself will be translated into me.pro. It will be translated to it.pro, and then to they.pro, and that will be important in the future step for simplifying. And then another pre-processing step that we have is factoring out coordinated groups. So syntactic and semantic parsers have a lot of trouble with coordinated groups because they can confuse them with positives. So we found that using a simple part of speech identifiers are able to handle this more effectively than the semantic and syntactic parsers directly. So we use linguistic phrase types as a proxy for relatedness of a coordinated group. So we identify noun phrases that are grouped together in terms with commas and then a coordinator, or verb phrases or prepositional phrases and so on. And then once we identify these, we replace these with just the first, effectively removing the coordinated group, and then we process the simplified gloss and the coordinated group separately and insert afterwards. So an example extraction here is rejuvenate has the gloss I make it younger or more youthful, and we're able to identify that younger or more youthful is a coordinated adjective phrase. So we extract younger or more youthful and keep just younger. And then once we have done the semantic parsing, we do word census ambiguation with a pretty simple process. We start with the Princeton annotated gloss corpus, which provides the word census for many of the words in the glosses, which helps to make our system more effective. But in cases where it does not provide the word census, then we do some simple part-of-speech pattern matching to identify the context in which the words occur, and then make sure that the frames align, the context aligns with the frame that's given in WordNet. And this just acts as a sanity check to make sure that we're not putting a word sense that doesn't make sense. Finally, we construct the axiom using the refined frame and the semantic parse. So what we want to get, here's an example, or here's what it sort of looks like of what we want to get. So we have x slam y characterizes event E. Then we want the axiom to imply that then x violently striking y characterizes E, where x is a person and y is a thing. So we start by correlating the arguments. So we have the frame here that has the context in which it occurs, and then we also have the parse. And since we've canonicalized the arguments, identifying the subject, object, and the indirect object are very straightforward, since we just use these atoms. And then for the frames, they're also fairly simple. They're generally just left to right, unless it's a dative alternated phrase. And then once we've identified those, we replace the correlated arguments with variables, and then wrap the whole thing in an implication and a for all. Finally, we go over the evaluation. First, we'll go over ELS match, which is a evaluation metric we introduce. There we go. So we have two different evaluation sets. So we first have a gold standard set of 50 synsets, and these gold standard axioms are handwritten, and we evaluate this on both the ELS match metric, which allows partial credit, as well as a full axiom metric. And then we do a lexical entailment relation of verbs evaluation that uses the verb entailment data set provided by Wiseman. And this is to demonstrate the inference capabilities that are provided by these axioms, and also to compare to previous systems, because many previous systems have evaluated on this system as well, or on this data set as well. So first, ELS match. ELS match is a generalization of S match. The issue is that S match is very good in that it provides partial credit of axioms, but S match doesn't allow instances that are not atoms, such as very happy. So in the original representation, there are 3 different types of triples, and we add in one complex instance triple that allows a complex instance. So an example here is there's the EL formula, I'm very happy, or me.pro. I'm very happy. And this is a complex instance. And we show the use here where it has two variables instead of constant for the instance description. And then in the graph form, we see that this instance would not be allowed in normal estimation. So for the gold standard set, we started with 50 synsets, and it generates 52 axioms because if there are multiple frames, we'll have multiple axioms. This ends up being 2,764 triples. And then we have the results for ELS match and full axioms. So for ELS match, we have a precision of 0.5 and a recall of 0.82, and F1 of 0.83, which shows that generally our axioms are being produced fairly well, or are fairly accurate. And then the full axiom precision is 0.29, which is understandable and expected because these axioms are very complicated, and simply getting one word sense wrong or a slight parsing problem would lead to the full axiom being incorrect. And then we have the evaluation of the verb entailment data set. This was created by randomly sampling 50 common verbs in the rooters corpus, and then randomly pairing with the most similar verbs, and then they're hand annotated as being either representing a valid entailment or not. And there are 812 verb pairs, 225 which are labeled as entailing, and 587 which are not. So this data set is useful in comparing with previous systems, such as the TRIP system here, which is one of the systems from James Allen's group, which we talked about earlier, as well as some other previous systems. Supervise is the one that's presented by Wiseman, and then VerbOcean is another system that uses information extraction. So in order to do this, we simplify our axioms because this data set is just from a verb to a verb. So we remove semantic roles and word senses, and then to determine the verb entailment, we do some simple forward inference of 3 steps of the axioms, or until an abstract word is reached, where we have a list of abstract words that we have annotated. And we show that our approach really splits the difference between the TRIP system and the supervised system, which are the two state-of-the-art systems on this data set. So we get a precision of 0.43, which is less than the TRIP system, but better than the supervised system. Recall of 0.53, which is better than the TRIP system and worse than the supervised system. And then our F1 is better than the TRIP system and worse than the supervised system. So we're competitive with the state of the art, really splitting the difference between the TRIP system and supervised system. And then quickly we'll go over an example inference that shows really the expressivity that these axioms provide that are not possible with some of the other representations. So there's a sentence, John stumbles but does not fall, and has a wordnet entry of miss a step and fall or nearly fall. And by adding a simple linguistic rule that if X but Y, then it implies that X and Y occurs, then we're able to conclude that John misses a step and nearly falls. But with the intersective approach, which OWL-DL uses, this would lead to a contradiction. And we can, I'll leave it at that for now for brevity. So in conclusion, we argue that the semantic representations of previous systems were not quite sufficient for generating useful axioms, lexical axioms. And then we presented an approach to extracting lexical axioms into episodic logic from WordNet, introduced a metric ELS match that allows partial credit on complex instances, and then evaluated our approach using two different metrics. And then we have a lot of future work that we could do. We can deepen the gloss interpretation by either including the hypernym graph from WordNet, which we did not use, using techniques of other systems, such as a high-level ontology like James Allen uses that helps provide more consistency among the axioms. And then also techniques by Nazrin and James that uses clustering of arguments to refine the arguments and allow entailments to be more consistent. Also, in order to use this for real, true natural language understanding, we would need to also extend the word to nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. And as we mentioned, the word sentence ambiguation algorithm is fairly simple, so we could also use a more sophisticated word sentence ambiguation, and also add in concurrent information such as VerbNet and FrameNet, that, as well as other parallel dictionaries to help improve our axioms. And that's it. Any questions? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. What's a triplet?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I should go that. So here, so for S-match, there is a representation of a conjunction of what they call triples, which is either an instance, a simple instance, a relation, or an attribute. And you can see they all have three entries, so they're called triples. And we introduce a complex instance. So each one of these is a triple, so you could imagine for a complex axiom, you would have a big conjunction. So that is what it is. So yeah, so these are the triples. Yeah.
What was the example?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I could go over that more carefully. Yeah, so there's stumbles but does not fall. And then we have for stumble and misses a step and fall or nearly fall. And what ends up happening is that if you have an intersective approach, then nearly fall is the intersection of the adverb nearly and fall, which means that that would entail that it actually did fall, and then that would contradict. It would contradict with not falling. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are these around.
Yeah.
Does that go from 0 to 1?
Yeah, it goes from 0 to 1. So if there are two, if the set of so the way EL S-match and S-match works is that the gold set is represented as a big conjunction of triples, and then the predicted axiom is also represented as a bunch of triples, and they try to, since they have variables that aren't really going to necessarily be the same variables, they try to map the variables to maximize the number of triples that match across, and this retains some of the constraints of the structure within each of the axioms while trying to maximize how much they match. And it turns out that if you have the identical axioms, then you would get 1. And then if they're completely different, then you'd get somewhere around 0. Yeah.
And I was also wondering, when you do the final results, like,
yeah.
Like one's higher precision, one's higher recall,
Yeah.
What's going on with those, like especially, or the supervised version especially, why is the recall so much better?
Well, generally, supervised systems do much better in terms of recall because they are able to generalize a little bit more effectively than the other systems. But what we find is that the precision is much worse. It's actually, I should think how to word this. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can come up with a better description right now there.
Yeah. Just kind of trying to picture the seeker precision recall trade-off, which would be approached is actually
Well, what we find is that generally the non-supervised versions of trips and our approach are both non-supervised. They do better in precision because they do a little more deeper analysis of the entries themselves. And then the supervised systems are able to generalize the things that are similar better, because in the systems such as trips and our approach, they're very sensitive to slight differences that can lead to, so if you try to do a forward inference and you're just missing one entry, you're not going to be able to get it. We would expect that if we sort of generated additional axioms from other resources, then this recall would improve without necessarily affecting the precision too much. That's what I would expect. But with supervised systems, it doesn't require inferencing on axioms, which allows it to generalize more easily. Yes? Oh, so abstract word would be like be or cause. It's really words that the definitions aren't very useful in WordNet. Yeah. Oh yeah. It was written up by hand. In the notes, I have the number. I forget the exact number. It was some like 20 abstract words that we wrote out by hand. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I can send you the list. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Oh, we got 3 viewers on here.